So once it became clear that the El Paso shooter was a right-winger radicalized by many of the same ideas that have been fomented by this administration, leaving a right-wing manifesto, Republicans had to rally around something else, some other talking point. And the talking point they chose basically was video games. We've got to do something about video games, with some vague mentions of social media in the background for credibility's sake, I guess. And we're going to get into some of these examples. Now, just a reminder, this video is going to be demonetized on YouTube. Almost all of today's show will be demonetized on YouTube because it's a show about shootings, terrorism, radicalization, important stuff. I've spoke to some other shows. Some people are choosing not to cover this in order to retain monetization. We've got to cover this stuff, okay? So I'm asking you, leave us a tip today. Become a member at joinpakman.com to help out with the fact that today's show is going to be a freebie in the sense of a no revenue show. So they bring out this tired trope of video games cause people to become radicalized and violent and go out and act out all of that violence in the real world. Here's just one short example from Fox News.
Bernard, what about video games? So many of these school shooters and others have been sort of raised on a diet of violent video games.
Now, this has been studied. Video games may cause already violent people or people predisposed to violence to go out into the world in some cases and commit a real world act of violence that they've already been predisposed to and potentially have even been thinking about. But video games, by and large, are not causing violence in otherwise nonviolent people. They will not indoctrinate perfectly reasonable people into the anti-immigrant, xenophobic, white nationalist delusions of the El Paso shooter. And this came up again when Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick went on Fox News. Take a look at this.
And I look at this evil act, and let's condemn it for what it is. Evil. And I say, how long are we going to let, for example, and ignore at the federal level particularly, where they can do something about the video game industry? You know, in this manifesto that we believe is from the shooter, this manifesto, he talks about living out his super soldier fantasy on Call of Duty.
Another Republican, Kevin McCarthy, also on the video game talking point bandwagon. And sometimes they try to temper it a little bit by talking about social media, which does present a whole slate of issues societally, but that really shouldn't be mixed in with this video game talking point. Take a look.
But what are your thoughts on that in terms of understanding that words matter and that when we're talking to each other on social media or looking at video games where they're using videos of characters with these weapons, is there a conversation to be had about that, about the tone that this country is using? It's become commonplace to say whatever you want to anybody on social media.
I think we should, and you want to see from these individuals what they wrote in others, but I mean, this may be a place that we could find this ahead of time. There may be a place of what's being written can be changed, could be an indication that an individual needs help in others that we can stop. But the idea of these video games to dehumanize individuals, to have a game of shooting individuals and others, I've always felt that is a problem for future generations and others. We've watched from studies shown before of what it does to individuals. When you look at these photos of how it took place, you can see the actions within video games and others. But what I'd like to do is make sure just get all the facts.
So we don't have to pretend that violence in movies and video games has no effect on anyone culturally in any way. But the El Paso shooter is a guy radicalized around specific radical right-wing ideologies. People who play video games and aren't radicalized by the stuff that Trump has been spewing aren't going to go out and commit violence like this. I did a Twitch stream last night. By the way, you should be following me there, twitch.tv/David Pakman. And people asked me, do I play video games? And I said, I don't play very many video games, but the one that I've been playing since I was quite young are the different iterations of Grand Theft Auto, one of the most violent games that is out there. And there's absolutely no connection whatsoever between the cartoonish violence in the game and anything that I've ever even considered doing in the real world. And importantly, other countries have video games. Look at Japan and look at the fact that there are basically no shootings in Japan. Every country has racist people. Every country has atheists for those who want to blame the fact that, God is no longer in school. Every country has mental illness. Other countries don't have the problems that we have, even though they have lots of these other ancillary characteristics. And there are also more general crime statistics to consider. Remember that video game playing in the United States has gone up for decades. Violence in total has also been going down for decades. The general trend is video games up, violence down. So we have to look at the nitty gritty and the particulars of the types of shootings that we're actually having. And again, just as importantly, by proportion, there is just as much video gaming in other countries, and those countries don't have our mass shooting problems. This same guy, Dan Patrick, the Texas lieutenant governor, went on another Fox News show and said, we've got to really be careful about Antifa. Antifa's got to stay away, as if that has anything to do whatsoever with this shooting.
And again, law enforcement did an amazing thing. It just did an amazing thing. As your guest, I just heard a little bit of your previous guest talking about the crime scene. And, when there's one or two people shot, you can imagine the size of this crime scene. And this will be an investigation that will take some time. I was looking at a story recently. I just saw in the last couple of days where Antifa is posting, they want to come to El Paso and do a 10-day siege. Clear message to Antifa, stay out of El Paso. Stay out of Texas, basically. But we don't need them coming in on September 1st. We didn't need them to begin with before this happened. But I would say to Antifa, scratch Texas off your map and don't come in. It is not the time and place for them to come at any time, but particularly in the aftermath of what's just happening in El Paso. So Antifa, message from the Lieutenant Governor, stay out of Texas.
Now, I've never defended Antifa or any political violence, but the idea of saying, given that a guy just mass shot and killed 20 people and injured many more on the basis of this right-wing anti-immigrant, xenophobic, white nationalist ideology, now I should also mention we don't need Antifa here, as if there's some kind of equivalency between the two groups. And of course, in the background of every single one of these clips, what's the elephant in the room? It's never guns. And that's likely the motivation for the fact that so many Republicans are jumping on the video game talking point. It's never guns, and that we shouldn't talk about. But it's also never right-wing radicalization either. That also not coming up. It's video games, and we've got to be careful about Antifa. And next, we literally have the juxtaposition of interrupting right-wing radicalization to report on a right-wing shooting, and of course, never mentioning that the shooter actually left a right-wing manifesto. Let's talk about that next. Do you stand for the environment and for women's rights? There's a phone company that stands with you, and it's Credo Mobile. Credo is the only phone company in America that supports the same causes you do, causes like fighting to stop climate change, to protect reproductive freedom and immigrant rights. Credo donates $150,000 every month to groups like Rainforest Action Network, Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, and many more, while other phone companies are spending millions of dollars to push mega mergers through and funding right-wing politicians. You make choices every day about where you spend your money. I've talked about voting with your dollars. Make your mobile phone one of those choices. Switch to Credo Mobile now, and as a reward, you'll get 12 pints of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. That's a pint a month for 12 months. How about some of that Cherry Garcia, right? You'll also get coverage on the nation's largest, most reliable network. You'll get low rates. You'll get a complete selection of smartphones, including the latest models from top brands. Make the switch. Go to credo.com/Pakman or enter the offer code Pakman at checkout. That's credo.com/Pakman.